Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this July meeting of the Perth and Kinross Local Review Body. I am Councillor Lewis Simpson, the convener of the body, and I'm joined today by two volunteers, Councillor David Illingworth and Councillor Willie Wilson. I'm very grateful to them for volunteering. You might wish to note that I have no control over the members of this board. They're drawn at random from volunteers from the Development Management Committee. I'm also joined by Mr. David Harrison, who's the planning advisor to the local review body. He's not part of the council planning department and has had no previous involvement in any of the applications on the agenda today. We're also joined by Mr. Jeff Fogg, who is the legal advisor to the local review body, and from committee services, Mr. Danny Williams. We come now to declarations of interest. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest by members on any item on the agenda today? I have none. Councillor Illingworth?
I have none.
Councillor Wilson?
I have no declarations of interest.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Normally we would now have the minutes, but I understand they are going to be submitted to the next meeting. So we can move forward to the business of the day and move to the first application for consideration, which is an application for alterations and extension to dwelling house and erection of a garden building in retrospect at 1 Blair Fordle Steading, Kelty. And Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, convener. Just to confirm, as you say, it's a detailed planning application for the alteration and extension of a dwelling house and erection of a garden building at 1 Blair Fordle Steading by Kelty. And as you also confirmed, this is an application made in retrospect. So if I maybe just take you straight to the photographs now, but you might like to have page 37 available to you to provide location plan, site plan and drawings of both the extension and the garden building. So the first photograph we see here is us looking in a southerly direction generally, and you see the red roofs of the Steading buildings, and beyond that the former farmhouse, which is the listed building in this instance. And the most recent red roof in the lighter shade excuse me, is of course the extension itself, with number 1 being closer to the camera, as it were. What you'll notice in this photograph also is that there's a certain amount of hedging on the edge of the road there, and also a pedestrian footpath in the verge as well. So if we move from that position up the road a little bit, in the next photograph we get a bit more of a close-up of the extension and relative to the gable of the listed building. This is of course taken from the footpath that I mentioned earlier. And then if we move on from there in that photograph a little bit, we, as it were, have the opportunity to turn round and look in the opposite direction, as it were, still catching the farmhouse on the right hand side of the photograph, and of course the extension and the main section of number 1 in the further beyond. So if we move into the next photograph there, just to give a little bit more of a detail, obviously one of the issues here is the use of UPVC cladding. So this is the gable of the extension onto the carport or garage, and you can see the relationship between that and the edge of the listed building. Moving on from that, in the next photograph altogether, we move round to the far side of the the farmhouse building, and this is probably is the principal elevation of the building on the opposite side from number 1, as it were. But this is of course is the access to number 1, the courtyard of it, and of course some other properties as well. So they say, just to confirm, that's the southern elevation of the farmhouse you're looking at. Number 1 is behind it. So if we move on into the next photograph, we move up, as it were, up the access into the courtyard which serves number 1. So here we clearly have the original building and the extension as well. And from there we move to the next photograph. We see the remainder of number 1. So we have the property which is separate from number 1 in the immediate foreground here, and slightly beyond that the L shape or part of the L shape of number 1. So if we move to the next photograph, we're now looking down, as it were, the western courtyard of number 1, and we're looking obviously to the north elevation of the farmhouse in this instance. So we're just catching, let's say, the sort of the patio type windows of the number 1 itself, and you're just getting a little bit of the garage doors. So from there, if we move on to the next photograph, so we just show that relationship between, on the boundary, as it were, between the listed building and the garage extension. You can see the actual extension is more or less hard on the boundary. It's only set about 600 or 700 millimeters from the actual boundary of the property there. So if we move to the next photograph, we just step away just to give you the full context there. If we can move on to the next photograph, this takes us back out, as it were, outside again. We've looked at the gable element of the proposal. Now we're going to look at the outbuilding or garden shed element of the proposal. So this is us back on the public road, again looking in a southerly direction, and we see number 1, but we also see part of the outbuilding as you move in that southerly direction. So if we go from there to the next photograph, we see the hedge that I mentioned earlier, or the part of the hedge which is, I should say, largely obscuring, as things stand at the moment, the outbuilding of the garden room. And then if we move to the next photograph, we move into the garden ground. This is now in that, so we see, rear garden area, looking at the outbuilding from within the garden. That's of course the principal elevation of it, and the building you see on the left hand side of the photograph is part of the rear elevation of number 1. So if we move from there to the next photograph, just to show you the relationship of that side elevation of the outbuilding relative to the fence and the hedge beyond. What I should maybe mention at this point is, while you're looking at a fence there, there is not complete clarity as to whether that fence line coincides with the applicant's ownership. So there is some uncertainty as to whether or not the hedge is or is not within the applicant's control. So finally, if we move to the last photograph, I'll just leave you with that photograph of that extension and the gable. Turning now in summary to the applicant's case, the Stedding conversion next to the Category C farmhouse was undertaken in 2005. This application for the garage extension and outbuilding is retrospective, the previous owners having been advised by their designer that permission was not required. It is noted that the sole reason for refusal concerns the use of UPVC cladding on the garage and the garden room. This material was chosen due to its water resistance and low maintenance properties. It has been used extensively elsewhere in the Stedding development, including the garage door to the front of the farmhouse. The listed building has UPVC fascias and rainwater goods. The assessment is seen as being subjective. The garden room is not visible from the public road and is separated from the listed building by the house. The garage extension is adjacent to the listed building and is appropriate that it reflects the tight grouping of the Stedding building group. While it appears bright, the UPVC cladding will dull down and could be painted in a matte finish and recoloured if required. While adjacent to the farmhouse, the principal elevation of the listed building is on the opposite side, away from the garage gable. The reference in the decision to LDB2 Policy 39, landscape, is not understood, as the gable does not have any significant impact on the wider landscape, and also the garden room is screened from the public view by the hedge. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. While the principle of extending dwellings is supported, the specific details, possible impacts and the context of the site requires to be assessed. The property is part of a steading redevelopment and lies adjacent to a Category C listed farmhouse. The pitched roof carport extension has been erected onto the gable of the house in matching design and materials, with the exception of UPVC cladding. The dwelling is located next to the B996, and the carport gable is only some 4 metres from the listed farmhouse. In addition, the detached outbuilding or garden room has also been completed externally using UPVC cladding. While screened by the boundary planting, this building is seen as adversely affecting the amenity of the steading and the setting of the listed building, and does not make a positive contribution to the quality of the local environment. The applicant has been invited to use a more appropriate alternative material to UPVC. But at present, the use of this material in this building group is limited and is not seen as having a similar level of visual impact. The applicant would be willing to use painted timber cladding on the carport gable, but would wish to retain the outbuilding unchanged. This degree of revision was not seen as sufficient in relation to the circumstances of the development and the local area. In this case, there are no representations. There is, however, a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener. Convener, I think you're muted.
I am indeed, Mr. Harrison. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. Colleagues, are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Mr. Harrison. I'm on page 18 of the papers, and this is the submission put in by the applicant, a statement in support anyway. And at the top of that page, Mr. Harrison, it says that this is the applicant's words. The decision to use UPVC was taken on the basis it was being used extensively through Blairfordle steading. Now, we've seen quite a number of photographs, and I'm querying the word extensively because I'm not sure if I saw extensive use of that material. From your site visit, Mr. Harrison, have you any comments on that point?
Mr. Harrison, I can point out to you.
Thank you. Yes, obviously this is a fairly subjective view being expressed in short, by both the officer and the applicant's agent as to the degree to which it's used extensively or not. If you interpret the word extensively to mean it's used on quite a number of other properties, yes, I think the answer to that would be yes, it is elsewhere on more than one other property. If you're saying it's extensive in the sense that there are large areas where UPVC is used on whole buildings, which is the circumstances that you have with the outbuilding or the garden room, I have to say I didn't witness any particular buildings which use UPVC to that degree, but clearly UPVC is used fairly commonly, particularly for rainwater goods, if not for cladding, and sometimes for fascias as well. And in that sense, yes, there are also more modern properties, not just the converted properties you see which have stone walls, but there are additional houses, particularly to the northern side, which are modern properties which use UPVC, and in some instances it's used as a cladding material in those instances.
But if I can have a supplementary, Convener,
by all means.
The reasoning that the planning officer has given is the use of that material in close proximity to the farmhouse which is listed.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Illingworth, any questions from you for officers?
I've got no questions. Willie Wilson, as Councillor Wilson, has answered the correct questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Illingworth. So I have no questions on this one. Members, we can make a preliminary decision. Can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. I think with the papers and the presentation and the photographs, we've sufficient information to make a decision.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Illingworth?
Yep, I think we have enough information to make a decision.
I too agree. I think we have sufficient information, so we can now assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perthing and Ross Local Development Plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener, and maybe add to that materiality is we have the benefit of seeing what the proposal is, because this is a retrospective application. I can, first of all, I can understand why the applicants would want to construct a carport or garage at their property. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. And I think the only issue with that is UPVC cladding as such, which we can see in the photograph that's before us, and the fairly extensive nature of that in that regard, and its proximity to the what is still a very traditional type of building at the farmhouse, the original farmhouse. And this is, like many other former farmsteadings, a housing development now. And I recognise that there are modern materials used for certain things like rainwater goods. That's common practice in the building industry. However, it's the use of the material in that particular location that I think we're looking at. When it comes to the garden house, I think I'm afraid that I totally disagree with the applicant in this instance. I think the UPV material in white is singularly inappropriate at that location. Yes, it's behind a hedge, but if you cut the hedge, you would easily see and the hedge was due for a cut. I think you could easily see the building. Any garden building needs to be judged on its own merits, but it's usually these things are made of wood or a mixture of materials, and they might well enhance the property. I personally think that this hut, as it is in the garden, actually detracts from the good appearance of the dwelling house, and we can't guarantee the hedge would always be there, and it's certainly very prominent, and I think the material in that instance is totally inappropriate. Therefore, I would be suggesting that we support the reasons for refusal, and I think on page 27, Convener, in the second paragraph, the policies 1A I can understand and agree with. 1B, when it comes to C and G, a comment to make, which Mr. Harris might give us advice on. I'm not sure if height is an issue. C includes height, and neither of these, even the garage extension is sort of contiguous with the dwelling house. And I do think on that, Convener, that other materials would be possible to use without too much difficulty. And I think in G, the wording, the second last line, and natural environment. I think this is an urban environment rather than natural environment, because of the amount of building. And I don't think that the word important townscape landmarks is maybe appropriate to this location. I think the character and amenity of the place are, but I would leave that to Mr. Harris and Mr. Fogg to give us advice on these things being slightly amended as reasons for refusal. But I would be supporting the planning officer on this one.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Illingworth, may we have your view?
Yeah, the amount of UPVC is a subjective question, and I think on the whole, I think the planning officers have got it right here and they've handled it correctly. So I would support I would support the delegated decision.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Illingworth. For my part, I think I was struck when I was there the other day that although there is, as has been pointed out, a fair bit of UPVC about the place, I did not notice any other such extensive use of cladding as in this case. And I think as regards the cladding, we can see in the photograph now that is inappropriate, especially so close to the original farm building. And I think I would agree completely with Councillor Wilson as regards the garden building. The fact it's behind a hedge or a fence is not the issue. It seems to me to be an inappropriate use of this material, and I think I would agree on both cases, both with my colleagues and with the officer's report. So I think, Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous agreement on this occasion to agree with the officer's view in this report, with a little bit of tidying up which Councillor Wilson may wish to articulate further on, or perhaps you can clarify, Mr. Fogg.
Yes, I think, Convener, I understood Councillor Wilson to prefer the removal of criterion G in relation to policy 1BC, and was recommending the deletion of the phrases "and natural environment" and also important townscape landmarks in the reason for refusal. Is that correct, Councillor Wilson?
Yes. Yes.
In that case, Convener, yes, I am clear as to the position that you're unanimously taking this morning.
Right, so that's that one dealt with. I realise it won't necessarily be the answer the applicants were seeking, but we now have clarity on what is required. So thank you very much for that one. We'll move now on to item 4.2, which is an application for the erection of a dwelling house and garage in principle on land 80 metres southeast of Keeper's Cottage, Braco. Can I ask you, Mr. Harrison, to introduce the application for review?
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a planning application in principle for the erection of a dwelling house and garage at land 80 metres southeast of Keeper's Cottage, Braco. The site forms part of a three-sided walled garden within the grounds of the former Ardagh House, which was demolished some decades ago. It runs parallel to the western boundary wall. The proposed house plot would be some 30 metres wide by 80 metres long, occupying approximately 1/5 of the total walled garden area. A substantial pond lies to the south of the walled garden. Keeper's Cottage lies to the north, outside the walled garden. The cottage and walled garden are not listed. I'll just take you through the photographs now, but you might like to page 107 to hand, providing you with location plan and site plan. The general sequence of the photographs, as you'll see here, is approaching the site from the north, then Keeper's Cottage itself, and then the site within the walled garden, and then the shooting lodge and the pond. So I say this is us in the first photograph, standing as it were on the public road side of things, at the entrance to the estate, or this particular entrance to the former estate from the public road. And so if we move from that position into what is standing within the grounds of the Roman camp, which of course lies immediately adjacent to the north of the application site. This is us now looking down, as it were, parallel to the access road towards Keeper's Cottage and the north wall of the walled garden, which of course there'll be more detail of later. So if we again move from that position down into the access, as it were, that runs along parallel to that north wall of the garden. This is us now looking at that eastern gable of Keeper's Cottage, which you can see is outside the walled garden, and the site is, as it were, behind the wall from this particular position, and you'll see there's an entry through into the walled garden at that point as well. So if we move from that position, we swing round towards the left and we look down the other section of the extent of the walled garden on that northern side, and we're still outside the walled garden at this particular point. We then move on from that slightly towards the right, and this is a pedestrian entry in that, so we see western section of the wall into the walled garden itself. So we're just beginning to see the first part of the application site through this entry. So from there, as it were, if we step through the entry, we're now looking down in a southerly direction, and on the right hand side of the photograph we've got that western wall of the walled garden. As you can see, there's some well-established trees within the application site. So if we swing round towards the left of that, we look across the, as it were, the extent of the walled garden area, and in the immediate foreground, of course, we have part of the application site. And again, from that same position, swinging round to the left, we see the upper part, as it were, of the application site and that northern wall, and you can see again the entry that I mentioned earlier. So if we move on from there, it takes us to the far side of the walled garden now, and this is as outside. There's another house or shooting lodge, I think it's referred to in the papers, adjacent, but outside the eastern part of the walled garden. And if from there, if we swing round to the left, just to give you an indication, the reference earlier to the pond towards the south of the walled garden, as you see, it's quite an extensive pond. And you see, if we swing round to the right of that and step into the walled garden again, we're still getting another part of the pond and picking up the section, the lowest section of the application site where it abuts the pond. This is us now, say, within the eastern end of the walled garden, looking back towards the application site. So there'll be one or two photographs from that sort of position within the walled garden, swinging round to the right in the next photograph. We look across the remaining part of the walled garden, and we're still catching, just in the far distance, you might be able to make out the roof of Keeper's Cottage, and of course the application site within the walled garden. So that's us looking at the north wall. Again, from that similar position, swinging round to the right again, we look towards the eastern wall. So as you can see, there's an extensive part of the walled garden out with the application site, as well as the application site itself. And if we swing round to the right of that photograph again, we catch the property I mentioned before, the shooting lodge, which is just out with the walled garden, as see along that eastern section of the wall. So if we move on from there, in the next photograph, I'll just leave you with that general photograph showing as much as I can of the application site, and you're just probably be able to pick out the roof of Keeper's Cottage beyond the walled garden. Maybe turn now to the summary of the applicant's case. In summary, the site has been chosen because it would have least visual impact due to the high walls, including the potential impact on the adjoining scheduled ancient monument, the Ardagh Roman military camp. The indicative drawings show the house located at the northern end of the site, with the majority of the site laid out as a formal pleasure garden. The walled garden area is visible from the core path which runs along the southern side of the pond. The indicative position of the house would place it some 140 metres away from the path and against the backcloth of the garden wall. The formal gardens that are envisaged are seen as enhancing the enjoyment of for any walkers and preferable to the current overgrown condition of the walled garden. The walls of the walled garden are in need of substantial remedial work, including the rebuilding of collapsed areas, repointing and new copings. The cost of the work would be substantial. It is envisaged that this would be undertaken alongside the new house and the creation of the formal garden. These works are seen as a material planning consideration that supports the application. This was not taken into account in the planning officer's assessment of the proposal. The applicant disputes the officer's view that the application site concerns a small part of a large walled garden, and is only defined on two sides. In his view, the site concerns the whole walled garden area, where both formal and informal areas are envisaged, and its boundaries are defined by the walls and the pond. The officer's reference to the landscape being, inverted commas, manufactured, close inverted commas, is seen as misleading the proposal and misunderstanding the proposal. The applicant's landscape architect could explain the concept envisaged at a hearing or a site visit. While no details of the house have been submitted, the Council has control over the position, scale and design of the prospective house. Turning now in summary to the Officer's report of handling. LDP2 Policy 19 and the associated Housing in the Countryside Supplementary Guidance are the key considerations. The site is not part of a building group, an infill opportunity, a conversion of a replacement building, or involves brownfield land. Proposal has not been submitted in relation to a specific local or operational need, or to provide an innovative, sustainable living dwelling house. The only section of the policy and guidance that might provide support states, and I quote, proposals for a new house or houses within the original garden ground associated with an existing country or estate house will be supported, providing that there is an appropriate landscape setting and additional development will not fundamentally affect the qualities and integrity of the site. End of quotation. Proposals require to blend sympathetically with the existing landform, be within an identifiable site, and make a positive contribution to the surrounding area. The criteria requires that there is an appropriate landscape setting and additional development will not fundamentally affect the qualities and integrity of the site. The application site is a small part of a very large walled garden with little natural or topographical features providing containment. The proposed house plot is open on half of its boundaries to the east and to the south. In that context, the site is viewed as being manufactured and is not viewed as having a good landscape setting. In conclusion, the development would be open to the extensive walled garden and lacks an existing landscape framework and is not supported by any of the categories in LDP Policy 19 and the associated Housing in the Countryside Supplementary Guidance. In this case, regarding representations, Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust objects to the proposal, expressing concern of the potential effect on the Roman camp, scheduled monument. In this case, there is both a request for a site visit and a request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on the application for review? Councillor Illingworth.
I've got no specific questions. We've had quite a lot of information through the papers and from Mr. Harrison's report.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Wilson, any questions from you for officers?
Yes, thanks, Convener, and thanks for the report, Mr. Harrison. On page 108 of the papers, we can see the proposal and outline. Am I right in thinking from the papers that the applicant owns all or most of the garden area, the old walled garden area?
You're on mute, Mr. Harrison.
My apologies. My understanding is that the applicant does own the whole of the walled garden, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. And whilst this is in principle, we've got a detailed design outlined on page 108, where it would appear that the house is in one corner with a very extensive landscaped garden in itself. I think the other point I want to query is we've got advice about the Roman fort and its proximity. Do we know in any detail what the risk factor is if there were any development here in relation to the Roman fort? Because it was fairly extensive and I know it's immediately adjacent to the site, but there must have been disturbance when the walled garden was made, which was post-Roman, I think, and when Ardagh House was there. So, and somebody might say, well, who gave the Romans planning consent in the first place? But leaving that aside, there will have been some disturbance before. I mean, I just wonder if we have any assessment from our professional organisations to what the risk factor is if there were any development.
As you say, it being a walled garden, at least the surface area can be expected to have been cultivated quite extensively in the past. The suggestion from the Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust is that were you minded to grant consent for the proposal, it would be necessary to place a condition to allow for an archaeological investigation to be undertaken. So in other words, the top surface might have been disturbed. It may still contain remains of archaeological interest, but of course a full investigation I think we can be fairly sure that probably wasn't carried out at the time when the walled garden was formed. People didn't tend to pay such level of, shall we say, cognizance to that in the past. But if you were minded to grant consent, it would be appropriate for you to have a condition to say that an archaeological investigation and survey is undertaken prior to actual development works taking place.
Indeed, and if there was such a condition, then it would be incumbent on the applicant to pay for that archaeological excavation and investigation.
Indeed, and the issue of actually analysing anything that turns up and who pays for that would probably be part of that as well. Yes.
Yeah, and the sums involved might not be inconsiderate.
It's always, inevitably it's always difficult to anticipate in advance. Sometimes nothing's found, and sometimes it can be proved to be, as you say, significant.
Yeah. My third question, Convener, relates to, we've already got 2 existing dwellings within or just out with the curtilage of the walled garden. There's Keeper's Cottage. Mr. Harrison, from your visit, were these the houses look as if they're substantial and habitable? Were they both inhabited?
The Keeper's Cottage is inhabited by somebody who is employed, shall we say, in some context, I don't know in detail, but employed on the estate, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
The other property, which I think is generally referred to as a shooting lodge, didn't appear to be occupied at the time, and seems to be potentially a property that might be let in some context.
Okay. Thank you, but their proximity to the walled garden is quite close from the photographs you showed.
Yes, they're both effectively adjacent, yes.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Harrison. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I just would like Mr. Harrison to get absolute confirmation from you. The point made in the reason for refusal on page 83 is that it's a small proportion of the garden, and then the applicant's contention is it's the entire garden. Am I right in thinking that the application site is just the northern area down to the pond that includes the house, and that roughly 4/5 of the area is not part of the planning application?
That's correct. Yes, you rightly say if you go to all the papers submitted with the planning application, the application site is defined as the area within the walled garden that you've mentioned there, rather than the whole walled garden, plus of course the means of access to that from the public road.
Right, so that the application is not for the whole whole garden. Just to be absolutely clear, right?
No, the application relates to the change of use of the area, indicating shown indicatively as occupied by a house and a formal garden and a less formal area adjacent to the pond.
Yes, and I take it that no actual planning permission is required for the formal garden.
No, in short, whether or not that is carried out is very much, as in most instances, at the discretion of an applicant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. So I have no further questions. So I think we can have a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth?
I've got enough information to make a decision.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson, are you happy to proceed?
I agree to proceed.
Yes, and I too am happy we have sufficient information. So we can now assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Illingworth, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perthing Ross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Yeah, I like this proposal. I think it has a number of benefits. It will allow the wall of the walled garden to get the maintenance it deserves. In terms of the architectural issues, not architectural, the archaeological issues, it gives an opportunity for us to put in a condition that that the site is fully excavated and has a proper dig if necessary, certainly, and that would reveal a lot of information that would probably never ever get revealed about that particular site. So I would move that we give permission in principle for a building on that site. Presumably, I'd hope to see it just a single story building that because there's a 3 meter high wall around the site. I think that would be extremely attractive. So I'm in favour of the planning application.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Wilson, may we have your view?
Yes, Convener. Whilst I have some empathy and understanding of the application, I think in overall planning terms, I would go with the planning service report. Not because I think that residential development might be totally inappropriate here. There are plenty walled gardens within Perth and Kinross that have been converted sympathetically converted into some sort of residential development. But I think to give consent just for one house without some clear indication of what might be. I think the current plan before us is quite incongruous because the house footprint is quite modest in relation. It's a very, very big walled garden. And the reality is that the wall is needing some TLC. And I think any proposals to do that would be welcome. We also have 2 existing properties which seem to be in good order in the immediate surroundings. So there is some residential development. But if the owner and applicant want to look at a potential for residential development here, I personally think doing one house at a time is the wrong way to go about it. And I think it would be more appropriate to have a comprehensive plan of what is proposed, because we could get an application in next week for another house and then another one and another one. You could get 10 properties in there, perhaps, depending on their size and extent and the size of the gardens. But I think we send out the wrong message by approving. I can understand the point that Councillor Little has made, and I respect his view, but I think it's the wrong approach, and I would therefore favour refusal of this application for the reasons outlined in the notice of the decision notice. I'll stop there, convener. Hand over back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. I find myself in a position of agreeing with some of the points that both of you have made on this occasion. I was struck when I looked down at it from the Roman fort the other day when I was there, how extensive the garden appears, certainly as you look down at the wall. And it struck by Councillor Wilson's point that this first house, or this house that's being proposed, is very much in the corner of the site. And there is no doubt that despite the applicant's contention, it's only a fairly small proportion of the garden that we are considering today. And I think it would be better to consider the whole thing in its entirety. I agree that further archaeological information could benefit from that if there is a development. But I think on this occasion, and with this particular, the way this particular application has been worded, it is the subdivision in my mind of a large walled garden, which I don't think is something that we can support. I think also we need to consider, and we can do this when we get along a bit further, we need also to consider the fact that the big house, as it were, that formerly associated with this garden is actually no longer there, and that is a consideration we need to take into account as well. So I think on balance on this occasion, I'm prepared to agree with Councillor Wilson and to uphold the officer's decision on this occasion, although I would like to put in perhaps something about the existing house, and also the fact that I would consider this proposal to be a change of use for part of the garden, and another reason why I would wish to refuse it. So I think we have a 2, but at least we're not all in agreement on this occasion. We have a 2-to-1 decision in favour of upholding the refusal. So, Mr. Fogg, can I ask, do you have sufficient information for this?
Yes, convener, I think so. I think the purpose of the minute, if we could get clarification from Councillor Wilson. I heard Councillor Simpson suggest that in the reason for refusal, the first line, I think you're asking that the reference to subdivision is changed to the term change of use of a small portion. Was that correct?
Well, it's my view that because of the subdivision, it's a change of use. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Right. I think I understand that. On a point of detail, I do note, looking at the reference to the development plan, it's normally just referred to the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2 brackets 2019. So I presume you would be content for that typing up.
Yes, indeed.
But I also heard you to advocate a second reason for refusal, which was to found on the requirement in the Council's Countryside Guidance of 2020 to the requirement for there to be an existing house of the walled garden, and as we've established, there is no existing house there, and therefore on the face of it, it does appear to breach that requirement of the guidance document. And again, for the minute, is Councillor Wilson also content that that second reason for refusal is added in? If it's,
I'm content with that, Mr. Fogg. Yep.
Thank you. I think on that basis, then I'm sufficiently clear that Mr. Harrison and I could complete the appropriate decision notice on your behalf with that further reason for refusal incorporated. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fox. I think that is that one decided. Again, I realise this will not be necessarily the decision applicants require, but they've heard our reasons and can take the appropriate action if they choose to do so. Now, if we move now on to item 4.3, which is an application for the erection of a dwelling house on land 170 metres northwest of Tom na Moyne in Acharn. Can I ask you, Mr. Harris, to introduce this application for review?
Thank you again, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the erection of a dwelling house 170 metres northwest of Tom na Moyne, Acharn by Aberfeldy. The site comprises an existing access, turning and storage hardstanding relating to previous forestry extraction operations and part also of adjoining woodland. The access, parking and storage areas are generally set at the same level as the public road and would accommodate the proposed house. The land immediately to the north, this is within the application site, and its proposed curtilage falls steeply away down to the shores of Loch Tay, approximately 100 metres or 300 feet below. The northern elevation generally aligns with the sharp break and slope so that the related terrace projects beyond and is supported on stilts. The building would have an L-shaped plan form and takes also the form of a number of linked elements with separate pitched roofs. The proposed four-bedroom house is of a contemporary design. The walls would be finished in blackened larch cladding and the roof would have a natural zinc sheeting finish. I'll take you through some photographs now, but you might like to have page 193 onwards, providing you with a location plan, site plan, and of course drawings of that proposed house. The general sequence of the photographs will be the site as seen from the public road, from the frontage and its access, the house site itself and the prospective outlook, and then of course moving down the road to the existing ruin, which is related to the proposal. So in the first photograph here, we're standing on the public road and looking at part of the application site, the land, so we say, to the western side of the entry which exists. As you can see, there's a number of trees within that. There's also a number of trees have been removed, part of the forestry operations which took place a while ago. And then if we swing slightly to the right from that same position in the public road, this is of course the entry into that former forestry storage and parking and circulation area, which would form the main part of the application site. So the area you're looking at would be, in general terms, the position of the proposed house. And then if we swing again towards the right of that, we look in the thank you. Towards the right of that, this is looking now more in the Kenmore direction, the Aberfeldy direction, and you can see the continuous extension of the application site, which also includes some trees hard against the public road on that side. From there, if we step into the site itself in the next photograph, thank you. This is to say, that's looking back towards the earlier photographs on the public road, as it were, but allows us to swing round across this area which would accommodate the house. So if we move from there, in the next photograph, we look across the main area. And as you can see, the land's beginning to fall away beyond that. But that would be the main area where the house would be generally positioned. If we swing round again towards the right in the next photograph, from the edge, as it were, of what would be, shall we say, more like the balcony area, we look out towards Loch Tay. This is now in generally a northwesterly direction down to the loch. And then to swing round again to the right again in the next photograph, we look more in a northward direction across the loch towards Fiernan, if that helps you to orientate yourself. So if we move from that photograph, we move on to the ruin, which is referred to in the papers. This is as seen again from the public road, looking from the west. And as you can see, the gable of the ruin set below the road, and of course part of the walls as well. So if we move from that position up the road a bit and look back towards that gable, this is as seen from the public road, but I say from an easterly side. Again, you can see the extent of the ruin, but also the extent of the vegetation as has managed to establish itself. So clearly the ruin has been like that for some considerable time. So from there, if we swing slightly to the left in the next photograph, we look down the ruin itself, and as you can see, there's a relatively open area immediately beyond that on that western side. And I've put a little star on the photograph here just to indicate where the next photographs will be coming from. But as you can see, as you move towards that, the land slopes away from the public road, and you can see that the ruin is set down from the public road. So if we move up to where the star is in the next photograph and look back towards the ruin, towards the Kenmore end, you can see the gable, as it were, projecting above the vegetation there. That star is really just to show you if there was an access to be formed to serve that particular site, that would be the view in that direction from the centre of the public road. And if we swing round in the opposite direction in the next photograph, you can see the road going towards the Culin side, and that's towards the west. And as you can see, the land is relatively open where it's sloping away there. So if we can move to the next photograph, I'll just leave you with that photograph of the principal part of the application site, which would accommodate the proposed house. Moving now in summary to the applicant's case. The proposal is considered to comply with Category 4, that's renovation or replacement houses, of the Local Development Plan 2 Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside. The planning officer accepts that there is sufficient evidence of an existing ruinous house to support a proposal for its replacement under this category. The crux of the refusal seems to focus on the 335-metre distance between the ruinous house and the proposed replacement house. In the context of Category 4, the Housing in the Countryside Guidance 2020 recognises that proposals for alternative positions and different scales of replacement houses may come forward. In such cases, these should be justified through planning and design statements. There is no specific criteria identified for such statements. The statement provided explains that the existing ruin does not have an access, and its formation would have to deal with the difference in level with the public road. The proposed site has an existing access. The proposed house would have mature trees between it and the public road, and being flat is ideal for the construction of a house, by contrast to the site of the ruin. The proposed house would be set back, whereas the ruin lies adjacent to the public road. While the guidance indicated that the siting of the new house should be similar to the existing house, it is recognised that individual site conditions can suggest that another position would create a better landscape fit. In that sense, the proposed change in the location of the site is viewed as a positive step in terms of landscape fit. The officer's view that the replacement house should be located within the site or immediately adjacent to the existing ruin is not viewed as supported by the criteria in the supplementary guidance. Referring to other local review body cases in support of this view, this is seen as inappropriate, as each case and site should be assessed on its merits. The guidance recognises the relevance of individual site conditions, and the reference to creating a dangerous precedence is challenged. It is noted that the design and scale of the proposed house itself is acceptable. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. The application site lies within the Loch Tay Special Landscape Area. The proposal is for a replacement house for a ruin within the applicant's ownership. The ruin lies adjacent to the public road, and forming an access and the limitations on private amenity and the presence of a power line are seen as challenging in developing at such a location. It is accepted that there is sufficient evidence of the existing ruinous building to enable its size and form to be identified as required for consideration under Category 4 of the Housing the Countryside policy and supplementary guidance. The ruin was a small single-storey cottage. By contrast, the proposed replacement house would be of a substantially larger scale. The supplementary guidance states that the replacement house should normally be similar in scale to the original house. The information put forward is not seen as justifying this departure from the guidance in terms of the scale of the proposed house. More importantly, the replacement house is not on the same or a similar site, but some 335 metres away further to the east. In that context, it is not viewed as constituting a replacement dwelling, as there is little or no discernible relationship between the application site and the location of the ruin, beyond being within the same ownership. While the guidance makes some allowance for the repositioning where a better landscape fit can be secured, it is expected that the replacement house will be located within the same site or immediately adjacent to secure a better landscape fit. Reference is made to past decisions where the Council has sought to be consistent in ensuring a direct relationship in the siting of a replacement house with the position of the former house or building. It is noted that such decisions have been supported in previous appeals to the local review body. Allowing new houses to be sited at a distance from the original buildings is viewed as contrary to the ethos of the supplementary guidance concerning replacement houses. Regarding other considerations, the overall design of the proposed house is seen as acceptable in itself and in relation to the Loch Tay Special Landscape Area. The site conditions at the location of the ruin are not considered to be of such significance as to justify a departure from the local development plan policy in this case. In this case, there are no representations. However, there is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Wilson?
Yes, indeed. One or 2 points. Mr. Harrison, you've had the benefit of being on site for some time, and there is a drop from the road to the ruinous house. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And is there any access to that site, a road access that's still existing?
There was none that I could see, and certainly not in use. any access in the past is not at all obvious. Obviously, at this time of year, things are pretty overgrown. Certainly, there was nothing suggesting an access at present.
And from the photographs, am I right in thinking that the ruinous house is in close proximity to the public road? Yes,
it probably is in the order of about 3 to 4 meters from the edge of the public road, depending on how you define it.
Yes, and the actual site itself is lower than the public road.
Yes.
And would it be reasonable then to think that if it was replaced on the current footprint, if you like, of the ruinous house, first of all, there's no easily identifiable by road access in, but there's also constraints on how you could construct a house there. Never mind the amenity being so close to the road, which is another issue. But I think that, for instance, the applicant indicates that there are constraints on the site. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, well, if we just deal with the constraints first, certainly there's a power line running, shall we say, on the western side of the ruin, set back some distance. The reason, if you deal with the constraints in terms of access, I thought it might be beneficial for you to see that there is, shall we say, because the road takes shall we say, a bit of a turn. There is a corner towards the, shall we say, the Cullen side towards the west, where there would appear to be a prospect of an access, if you're thinking of the degrees of constraint. So it didn't appear to be a situation that it would be impossible for some reason to gain a means of entry to the public road, albeit that, of course, there is a fair difference in levels, as you rightly point out. In terms of replacing a house on exactly the same footprint of the ruin that's there at the moment, it has all the constraints you already mentioned. Whether or not there are opportunities to find a position close by to that is something which really doesn't appear to have been explored in detail in a way that I could give you, a definitive response as to the ability for an adjacent, albeit something separate from the road, the ability of the land to accommodate a house in that more specific locality is something which I say there's really very little information in the papers which would help to guide us.
And one final point, Mr. Harrison, just the planning officer in their report, I think it's my interpretation, they've indicated that the design of the proposed design of the house is not an issue for them, the extent and design of the house.
Well, there seem to be two aspects to that. As a design in its own right, that yes, as you rightly say, the officer finds that acceptable as a design. There is this question of the scale of the house as a replacement house in the general situation, which does cause some concern.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Illingworth, have you any questions of officers?
No, Councillor Wilson has already asked all the questions I would ask, so I have no questions.
Yeah, thank you. I too find, Councillor Illingworth, once Councillor Wilson has been, most of the questions have been asked. But if I could just clarify, if I may, on the question of the scale, Mr. Harrison, can you give us an indication of how much larger the proposed house is than the existing ruinous house? Just an approximate idea.
Oh, it would be very, very approximate, because I have to say I don't have the actual dimensions of the original one, but it would be a number of times. It would be 4 or 5 times, I would suspect, in terms of the footprint, and whether or not you do or don't take in the should we say, the terrace or balcony element as part of that calculation or not is another matter altogether. It's a completely different house from that point of view, a different era in a different design altogether.
Yeah, but it could not be described as being of a similar scale.
I think it would be difficult to describe it as being of the similar scale, yes.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. So I think we can now make a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson.
I think we've got copious information before us, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Illingworth, do you have sufficient information?
I think we have sufficient information to proceed.
Thank you, Councillor. And I too am happy we have sufficient information, so we can now move to debate and assess the case. So, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perthing and Ross Local Development Plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start things off. I think, colleagues, having visited the site the other day, one thing is not in doubt: it's the most wonderful place to propose to build a house. That's for sure. If not a rather tricky road and hard place to find, but having found it, I was struck by two things. One is how small, how much smaller, and how remote from the site the ruinous building is, and I would be struggling to see that it's of a similar scale or near or adjacent to the site. Indeed, it's some 335 metres away. I think also I noticed that the council's housing in the countryside supplementary guidance is very clear on most of these points. Some supplementary guidance I find makes things less clear, but the housing in the countryside one is fairly clear, and I can see that this proposal fails to address certainly 1, 2, 3, 5, and indeed 6 of the supplementary guidance. So, although it's a wonderful site for a house, I have to say that I am not persuaded by the applicant's case, and on this occasion I would have to agree with the reason given by the planners. That's my view. Councillor Illingworth, may we have your view?
Yeah, it's impossible not to have sympathy with the applicant, because, as Councillor Simpson has just said, this is a wonderful site for a house, but it's also impossible not to ignore the fact that it's actually more than 300 metres away from the original house, and it's a completely different scale. And I have to say, I think the planning officers have come to the correct decision. Now, on a separate point, the papers include a detailed description of the proposed planning system for the house in several languages, and that goes over many pages that happen to be printed out, and certainly that information did not aid decision making in any form. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Wilson, may we have your view?
Yes, indeed, Convener, and I'm going to be the difficult card in the pack this time, because I think this application has some merit. I understand that there is 335 metres distance from the wee house at the roadside, or the original wee house at the roadside, and the current proposal. I also understand that the proposal is substantially bigger. But remember, the wee house at the roadside was 18th, probably, century, and we're now in the 21st century, and things change. Is my first point. Second point is, I think it would be difficult, if not impossible, to create a house on the footprint or very nearby the current ruinous building. I don't think it would be good amenity for a start, and my guess is, and it is a guess, right, that would be at least 100 metres away from the road, and possibly further away, to allow for the point, Councillor Simpson, you made about road access, to create that sensibly. and Mr. Harrison referred briefly to that, but also to create a degree of amenity for a dwelling house. It would also mean that a lot of trees would need to be taken down, which would be damaging to the environment. So I think that it's as you said, a quite exemplary potential house site. And although I understand that the proposal does not comply totally with policy, in practical terms, an alternative site would be probably about rather than being 335 metres away, maybe a couple of 100 metres away. And I think, to me, that would be acceptable to allow the house to proceed on that basis. And yes, it's a lot bigger, but I think the design is good. I think it fits into this particular site. So I would be in favour of allowing the replacement house with these constraints and caveats. But I'm in a minority.
Thank you very much, Nico. Once again, we're not all in agreement, which I would contend is a good thing. I think I would say, Mr. Fogg, that we have our decision. I would agree, if I may, with Councillor Illingworth's point about the heat pump information in a number of European languages. I could certainly have managed without all that, but I would have to disagree with Councillor Wilson. I feel that this is not a renovation or a replacement of a house using and I think it'd be an inappropriate use of the housing in the countryside policy to allow this house, no matter how wonderful a site it may be. So I think, Mr. Fogg, I'm perfectly content to go with the reasons for refusal, just with the usual tidying up of how the development plan is expressed. I think they're missing 2 and brackets. But other than that, I find that the reasons, I'm happy with all the reasons there and agree absolutely with the justification. It's not in accordance with the development plan, and I am not persuaded that we should depart from it on this occasion. So are you happy, Mr. Fogg? Do you have everything that you require?
Yes, Convener, thank you.
Thank you. Well, once again, I realise this will not be the answer that the applicants would wish, but I hope you agree we have given it a thorough consideration. Now, colleagues, I think given where we are in the agenda, I propose that we have a short break and reconvene reinvigorated and ready to go at 12 o'clock to consider the last 2 items. So we'll have a short break until 12 o'clock if we're in agreement. Okay.
Yep. Agreed.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you.
Okay, boss.
Yeah, I think that's us nearly ready to go, I think, if everybody's here.
I've got my coffee. I'm a happy bunny. I'm okay.
That's okay. So we'll just give it one more minute and start again at 12 o'clock.
Yep. You must have had a lot of travelling to go all these sites, Lewis.
Well, I did it over a couple of days on this occasion, Councillor Wilson. But, anyway, I think that's 12 o'clock,
Okay.
so we'll start again, folks. We're now on to application 4.4, which is a planning application for the erection of a dwelling house on land 30 metres south of Mookham's View, Hayfield and Leslie Road, Scotland Well. May I ask you, Mr. Harris, to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener. Maybe before I start introducing it, can I just check that Councillor Illingworth's with us as well?
I'm pretty sure I saw him there.
I'm here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. As you say, Convener, this is a detailed planning application for the erection of a dwelling house at land 30 metres south of Mookham's View, Hayfield, Leslie Road, Scotland Well. The site lies to the south of the applicant's house, Mookham's View. It is accessed via a private road, that's Hayfield, which serves 3 houses and a house plot which lies directly to the east of the application site. The house plot and the adjoining field to the south is owned by the applicant. The garden ground of the house and the adjoining Bankfoot Park cul-de-sac abuts the western boundary of the application site. The walls will be finished in smooth white render with natural stone and timber features. The roof would be clad in natural slate. I'll just take you through some photographs now. You might like to page 369 available, and the pages after that, which provide you with the location plan, the site plans, and the drawings of the proposed house. The general sequence of the photographs, as you'll see in this one, is the junction with Hayfield with the public road, then the site itself and the context, and then long views of the site as seen from the public road to the south, that's Causeway. So here we are in the first photograph, the red line indicating the access into Hayfield. So this is the land to the west of that access, because of course visibility at the junction is one of the considerations you have before you today. So the land to the west belongs to the adjoining property to the access. And then if we move to the next photograph, we move down the road a little bit and we're looking directly opposite the entry onto the public road. And the site itself is beyond the roof that you see identified there in the far distance as the application site. There obviously will be more detail of that later. Next slide shows the views, as it were, coming in from the Leslie side, that's on the eastern side. The access, of course, again indicated in red. But what you'll see on that side is a certain amount of tree and shrub planting close to that eastern side of the access, even though the wall of the property known as the butts is set back from the highway. So moving on from that photograph, we say, are in the access itself, the red line showing the extent of the land in the applicant's ownership, as I understand it. So this is looking along the verge and the fence, which we saw in the first photograph, the vegetation on it. That's of the property known as New Drop on that side. So that's generally looking in that direction. If we then move round in the next photograph and step back, this is us now in the access, and of course there's a lot of discussion in the papers about visibility and the degree of setback. So this is looking in that same westerly direction from a position 2 meters back in the centre line from the kerb in the centre line of Hayfield. So we then move on to the next photograph, which shows the same position, but now 2.4 metres back from the kerb. You'll notice there's a slight change in the circumstances. So from there, if we move on in the next photograph and look in the, as it were, through a car window, with the car coming to the edge of the carriageway, you can see, shall we say, in practical terms, what the visibility in that westerly direction looks like. If we now move on and look in the opposite side, this is now again going through the same process, as it were. This is now looking in an easterly direction, that's towards Leslie, at a position 2 metres back from the kerb. And as you can see, the extent of the application site and the fact that the vegetation, that's the trees and the shrubs, are out with the applicant's ownership as we understand it. That of course presents a potential limitation on the applicant's ability to present visibility in that direction. But what you'll notice in this photograph is that the road, as shall we say, begins to turn the corner in that direction and come round towards, as it were, the left-hand side of the photograph as we see it. It swings round, but there is a slight, what you might call, area that's obscured by the vegetation on the inside of the corner to traffic travelling in that direction. So that's from a position 2 metres back from the kerb. We go to the next photograph, we'll look at a position 2.4 metres back from, beg your pardon, it should say can we move on? Thank you. To 2.4 metres back from the kerb in that direction by way of comparison. So if we move on from those photographs relating to the access, we see one final, as it were, photograph, again, similarly taken through the car window. So you can see in practice, in that instance, the degree of visibility in that direction. Moving on from that photograph, we move out of the application site to the opposite side of the vegetation which we've been looking at on that eastern side. So as you can see, there's both a tree and shrub vegetation. This is taken within the area in front of the butts. So that's looking towards the access, and if we turn round in the opposite direction, in the next photograph, we're looking down to that corner that I mentioned earlier on that eastern side. So as you can see, the wall associated with the butts house is set back considerably from the public road edge. So if we move on from that photograph, thank you. This is us now looking down Hayfield, as it were, towards the application site. You can see the existing housing on the right-hand side as you go down towards the applicant's property and the site beyond. So if we go down Hayfield a little bit further, again, you begin to pick up the applicant's house and go on down again down Hayfield. We now come to where the access would go through, as it were, past the gable of the applicant's property, Mochran's View. And again, if we keep on going down the access, as it were, in the next photograph, we step over that wall you might have noticed, and you can pick up the gable of the applicant's property here. And as you can see, the access will effectively go down the side of the gable, removing, of course, the greenhouse we see in the foreground here. And then as if we move to the next photograph, we carry on further down that access. This is us entering the application site. And there's a sort of a garage building shown on the details of the site layout. So if that gives you an orientation on that. So the site itself lies in the main to the right-hand side of that photograph, and the plot which currently enjoys planning permission lies on the left-hand side of the photograph, I say on that eastern side. And as you can see, that plot is currently enclosed by high sort of capricious hedging as things stand at the moment. So if we move on from that photograph Thank you. Swinging to the right from the same sort of position. Now we're looking across the main body of the application site. It's obviously to the rear and the south of the southern side of the applicant's property, Mochran's View. So that's looking in a southwesterly direction. And so if we swing round in the next photograph towards the right, we get the south-facing garden of Mochran's View. And of course we catch the roof of the property in Bankfoot Park adjacent to it. And as you can see, that's a 1.5-storey property with a dormer set into the roof. If we swing slightly to the right of that photograph again, we just get the full elevation, front elevation on the southern side of Mochran's View. So moving on from there in the next photograph, this is us now looking into, I say, land which is in the applicant's ownership, which has approval which was granted by the local review body, as explained in the papers, for the erection of a house in detail. So if we step into the application site and swing slightly to the right, say we're looking across that plot site, I should say, rather than the application site, looking across the plot itself, which has permission. You can see there's a certain amount of internal planting, but also a high cypresses hedge on the boundary of that plot adjacent to the farmland, and we'll see that in a later photograph as well. So if we move on from that photograph of the plot, which has approval, we, as it were, step in, as it were, into the field. This shows the relationship with the field line to the south and the extension of various gardens along that, shall we say, division between the field and the built-up area, the settlement area. And then if we swing to the right of that, we take in more of the application site, and you can pick up again the roof associated with the property in Bankfoot Park, that is. And this is looking at the southeast corner, from the southeast corner, I should say, looking in a westerly direction. So if we move on to the next photograph, thank you, we says we're step into the field, again, just to give you a broader context there. This is the edge of the settlement. You can see Bankfoot Park property and the break between the field and the application site. And swinging round to the right of that photograph, again from the position of the field on the extreme left, we've still got the roof of the Bankfoot property. We've got the applicant's house and the main body of the application site to the south of the applicant's house. And then again, if we swing to the right of that photograph, in the next photograph it is, we get the hive hedge that I mentioned, which encloses at present the plot which already has planning permission. So if we move on from that photograph, we swing right round just to give you the impression of the openness, as it were, of the agricultural land lying to the south of the application site. From there we move on down to the public road, which approaches Scotland Well from the south. And just to give you an indication of the context of the application site, indicated there in terms of the very long views of Scotland Well and the rising ground behind. We move on from that down the road a little bit, just to give you a little more of an indication in more detail, looking across the open ground towards the application site. And then from that position, if we swing slightly to the left, we catch the remainder of that, shall we say, settlement edge of the of Scotland Well itself. And as you can see, the reference to the majority of the properties being single-storey on that particular settlement edge. So if I leave you with the last photograph, which just shows you the application site, I'll now turn to the applicant's case in summary. The plot to the east enjoys an extant detailed planning permission. This was granted on appeal by the local review body in 2015. The condition requiring a 2.4 by 43 metre visibility display at the junction of Hayfield with Leslie Road has been subsequently removed. This proposal is for a 2-storey house with an overall height that is equal to the approved house to the east. There are no 2-storey houses in the immediate vicinity, but there are such properties elsewhere in Scotland Well. The proposal is seen as respecting the scale, height and massing of the approved house plot house. Regarding access, the National Roads Development Guide recognises that 5 houses can be served by a private road. The Council has accepted that 4 houses can be served by the existing access. It is the applicant's view that 1 additional house does not present a safety hazard at the junction of Hayfield and Leslie Road, requiring a 2.4 by 43 metre visibility display. It is seen that good visibility can be achieved from a setback of 2 metres. Turning now in summary to the Officer's report of handling, the site is within the settlement boundary of Scotland Well, and the principle of developing the land for a house is acceptable. However, most of the surrounding houses are single-storey, and those with a 1.5-storey contain the upper level accommodation within the roof space, sometimes with dormers. As there are no 2-storey houses in the vicinity, this proposal on the edge of the settlement is seen as out of character and of a design, scale and massing contrary to LDP2 policies 1 placemaking and policy 17 residential areas and the associated supplementary guidance. The roads condition, which was part of the house plot permission, was removed as the applicant did not own the land needed to provide a 2.4 by 43 metre visibility display. In 2016, it was indicated that only 1 additional house would be required to use the entry, and the condition was removed on that basis. No evidence has been provided to demonstrate the standard of visibility that can be provided or what improvement might be secured in relation to this proposal. Transport Planning, Road Safety Team, consider that visibility requires to be improved to the standard previously identified for this further house, and if this is not achievable, the proposal should be refused as contrary to LDP2 policy 60B and Designing Street Policy Statement for Scotland, which identifies this standard for a 30-mile-per-hour street. The temporary 20-mile-per-hour speed limit is not seen as changing the situation, as visibility needs to be assessed on the basis of the permanent 30 miles per hour speed limit. Turning now to representations, there have been 2 representations, including the Kinrossshire Civic Trust, and these have been received and mainly concern the proposal being contrary to development plan policy, road safety concerns, that the proposal doesn't respect the building pattern and visual amenity of Scotland Well, and the scale of the dwelling and the height of the dwelling. In this case, there is a request for an accompanied site visit. There is no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Councillor Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Could we go back to, if possible, to the photograph that shows the entrance into the proposed site, the one where the greenhouse would need to disappear and the bins would need to find a new home? I realise it was halfway through the presentation, Mr. Harrison, but that's
go back.
Just about that's it. I'm right in thinking that Mookin's view is the house immediately on the right.
That's correct.
And that the boundary line there, between the red line, the application site, and the the house is about a metre?
Well,
Say about.
if you turn to page, yes, if you turn to page 369, which shows you that, and
Yep.
also beyond, it's of that order, yes.
Yes, yes. And that would be the vehicular access to, if this application were granted, that would be a vehicular access to two houses.
Yes, that is basically
one on the left that has consent, and one on the right that's the current application.
Absolutely, that's basically coincides with the access to the site that's already been approved.
Yeah, and the dog leg of the red line, which is extremely helpful, Mr. Harrison, would constitute the boundary between the proposed house and the current Mookins View.
Yes.
Yeah, and do we know how far away that is?
Sorry, the house, between the two houses?
Well, between the site, between that corner and the wall of the existing house.
Yes, I can tell you that. I'll just measure it for you here. Approximately 14 meters.
40. Okay,
14,
thank you for that. The road access issue is covered a lot of, pardon the pun, but covers a lot of ground in this application and the submissions and in your report. But I think in summary form, the Roads and Transport were willing to accept one more access, but that was on the basis of an improvement to the junction at that time. Is that correct?
I think it's more a question that if you're talking about the change in the circumstances between the consent which was granted by the local review body for the house plot.
Yes.
There was a condition requiring an improvement. It was found that that wasn't possible to be achieved because of the land ownership being out with the applicant's control. The Roads Authority effectively accepted the existing situation as you see it as being acceptable for that one additional house.
Yeah, but originally the LRB decision was predicated upon an improvement condition for the road junction.
That's correct. This may be a result of the fact that there was a plan showing the extent of the application site at that time, which implied, if I can put it that way, that the applicant did have control over the land on the eastern side of the site. There was even a change, a necessity to change the certificate of the declaration of land ownership during the course of that previous application to clarify matters, because that was challenged by the other parties who have, as I understand it, ownership of that ground. But the original application site identified by the applicant basically indicated that he had control over that. So I think there was a certain amount of confusion there.
Yeah, but the LRB decision previously and the condition that was within that decision was predicated on the availability of that land to provide an improved road access.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, thanks, Mr. Harrison.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Have you any questions, Councillor Illingworth?
No. Councillor Wilson always asks the right questions.
Right,
Thank you for that.
Thanks. I just have another couple of points of clarification, Mr. Harrison. Having been there and eventually found it, having driven up and down Leslie Road a few times, I'm still a bit unclear about the previous decisions. Now, I recognise it's not for this particular meeting to reconsider previous decisions, but I just wonder if you can give us some advice on page 369. The access the access to the site given permission in 2015. The only access to that is assuming we put in the road past Woodcombs View.
Yes.
And at the moment, as it stands, that's the access to that site, and that would go ahead where that house to be built.
Yes, I understand that's the only means of access. Yes.
Right. And in your view, is there sufficient room in that access for construction traffic?
With a certain amount of ingenuity by the person undertaking it, I think you could gain access to that. Certainly, I've seen circumstances that are as tight as that, if I can put it that way, where people maybe have to unload and decant and do various other things to actually be able to gain access. But I wouldn't suggest that the width of that is so tight that it would effectively preclude the prospect of a house being built.
Right, thank you very much for that. And then the other one, for a bit of clarification, the removal of the condition about the display at the road in connection with the previous application. Was there incorrect information given as to the land ownership, or has that changed?
I think there's a time sequence to this. When the application was originally submitted, it might be easiest to say if we continue to look at page 369, it basically the application plan as originally submitted implied that the thin triangular area of land on the east or right hand side of the access, as you can see it there, was within the applicant's ownership and control. As I mentioned, I think a little earlier, that was challenged by as I understand it, the two adjoining proprietors, that's the people of Newdrop and Remoke, to challenge that the applicant had sole ownership and control of that. And the issue was addressed by a further declaration or certificate by the applicant indicating that he didn't have complete control but had served notice on those other people insofar as that land was concerned. The issue was then referred to in the officer's report as the land ownership matter having been resolved. It seems likely that therefore that was maybe interpreted by the local review body members as there wasn't a concern, rather than having just sorted out the legal aspect of it. And for those reasons, they felt comfortable about putting on a condition, the situation apparently having been resolved, for the visibility display as required by roads to be applied. So that is my understanding of the, shall we say, the sequence of events which have led us to today.
Right. So further to that, if I may, that would mean we are being asked to give permission for, in effect, in effect, our decision today will affect two houses, and we're only looking at one planning application, using an entrance without the improved splay at the end. Is that correct?
I don't really think so. No, the applicant has the entitlement to erect the plot he already has planning permission for, having had the limitation of the visibility display been removed previously by a separate application. So he's no longer constrained by that. He could erect the house which already has permission without having to undertake any further improvement to the visibility at the junction.
Right, and then finally, if he were to do that, the access could be gained by using part of the present application site to access it without any further planning application. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Mr. Harrison. Thank you. So if there are no further questions, we can proceed to make a preliminary decision.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, indeed,
can I ask
Councillor.
a further question?
You may.
Based on what you've just been speaking about, and I should have asked this earlier, I apologise. Hayfield is a private entrance way. We know that. Is it owned by the applicant? Is the land owned by the applicant of Hayfield? I know that's a legally based question, but coming up the supplementary that I think that is important.
If you bear with me a moment. If you turn to page 366.
Sorry,
page 366, sorry.
Yeah.
At the
nearly there, I'm nearly there. Okay, yep, yes.
Okay, top of the page, land ownership certificate.
Okay.
The agent on behalf of the applicant, Mr. John Beals, has declared that he owns the whole application site, and the application site includes Hayfield. Okay,
but he claimed something before that transpired wasn't the case, as we've just heard. Leaving that aside, the folk that are in the new drop and Remilk, presumably they must have some right of access on that road then.
I think it's, yes, I think it's probably well established. They at least have a right of access. Whether or not they have any shared ownership is another matter. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. But because a view was presented before by the applicant about ownership that turned out not to be the case, and I'm just wondering if we're in that territory or not. But okay, thank you.
I think also maybe should if I can add something to that. Of course, ownership matters in general are civil matters, of course, just to confirm that formally between parties, and of course these situations can change. So, for example, people may come to an understanding or a separate legal agreement in terms of a change in ownership.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. So, if there are no further questions, I don't think there are, we can proceed to make a preliminary decision. So, members, can we determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson?
I'm content we can proceed.
Councillor Illingworth?
I'm content to proceed.
I too am happy we have sufficient information. So we will now assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perthing-and-Ross local development plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Thanks, Convener. Well, this one has a long history, and none of us were in the room in 2017 when a decision was made about a previous application, but it was made on the basis of some clear understanding of what land ownership situation was. And that's why I asked my last question, Convener, because that information proved to be inaccurate, and the land at the Bellmouth was owned by other people. I'm concerned about this application in a number of ways. I'm concerned about the amenity of the applicant's house, because I'm not sure about the planning integrity, if I can put it that way, of putting what's going to be 2 houses and an access road with, I think, at least parking for 2 cars each, if not equivalent garaging. and we don't have the detail of the previous application to that degree, of passing within a metre of that dwelling. And I'm not sure if that's good planning. However, the stable door is open and cannot be closed again. Just for Mr. Fogg's benefit, I'll say this: cannot be closed again because of the 2017 permission is still extant, and we accept that. But this doubles the approval of this application would double the amount of traffic. The question that was asked about the construction traffic was particularly germane, because it's tight, and you've been there, convener, and you will know with an eye, but the photographs were extremely helpful in indicating how tight the space was. It also means diminishing the area of garden for the existing applicant's dwelling house considerably. That's my first concern. My second concern is the scale and design of the house, which is not, in my view, in keeping, nor in the planner's view, in keeping with the immediate surrounding dwelling houses. Now, there are two-storey houses in Scotland. Well, there are two-storey houses in every village in Perthshire, but and Kinrossshire, just in case. But it's the immediate locality that the planners look at, not the overall settlement. And I think the building is quite high and over prominent, and would not be respectful of the amenity of the existing dwelling houses, including the one that has got permission already, and the applicant's house. And the third thing is clearly about road safety. It may be that the LRB the last time were persuaded to allow the house on the basis of improvement to the access. That would be a perfectly reasonable view to take. I don't want to be seen to criticise our colleagues who were here, because we, as I said, we weren't in the room at the time. We didn't see all the papers. However, we now know that access improvement is not going to happen, and therefore I think it would be inappropriate for us to approve. One extra house going out is unfortunate, two would be doubly unfortunate, and for these three reasons I would be saying that I agree with the planners. I have some comment on the detail of the grounds for refusal, but I'll come to that later if appropriate, convener. That's my summary.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. May we have your view, Councillor Illingworth?
Yep. Thank you, convener. I think we could have long and interesting discussions about whether we think the precedent, what our views of the precedent that was set by the previous planning application for a house by the LRB, but that precedent has been set that there will be one extra household using that lane, and having set the precedent, another extra house is not going to have a massive impact. The house itself is roughly the same size in terms of overall height as the house next to it. Again, we can argue about the precedent. The views that Mr. Harrison very kindly showed us from across the fields, it's several hundred yards away. I don't think it'll have a significant impact. So on balance, and it's very much an on-balance decision, I'm in favour of this application, so I would be voting for the planning application to proceed.
Thank you for your view, Councillor Illingworth. For my own part, again, whilst I agree with the previous points that the stable door it's too late to bolt it for what has happened in the past. I noted, having been on site, how the access is extremely difficult for the existing houses, I would say. Another point, at present, obviously the bin lorry does not go down the hayfield, and all the bins are left at the end of the road, which doesn't seem to me to be any particular site for them all. And I suppose if all the development takes place, there could be as many as 10 or 12 bins to be housed, and there's no space for that. I also share Councillor Wilson's concern for the amenity of Mookham's View. Although it's the applicant's house, I feel the access is very, very close. Indeed, when I was there, I thought I'd gone down the wrong road, went back up to check the house names to make sure I was in the right place. It's a very, very tight site. And I feel that I don't support necessarily Councillor Illingworth's view that one more house won't make a difference. I think sometimes you have to draw a line with planning and with the LDP. And we know with these larger houses there will be a number of vehicles using them, no doubt, and I think it'll make quite a big difference entering onto what's a very busy road. And certainly the traffic calming and 20-mile-an-hour limit didn't seem to be getting a huge amount of cognizance from the people driving past me when I was up and down trying to find the place. So I think with this one, I think it is too much development for this wee road and this entrance onto Leslie Road. So I think on this occasion I would agree with the points made by Councillor Wilson and uphold the reasons for refusal. So, Mr. Fogg, I think you have the answer. Again, we don't agree with a 2-to-1 decision, but I think I understand from Councillor Wilson he had 1 or 2 comments to make about the reasons for refusal, but I certainly am quite happy to support them. Perhaps, Councillor Wilson, you might want to offer some clarification to Mr. Fogg.
Yes, Convener, I'm on page 387 and there are I think 4 reasons for refusal. I'm concentrating on reasons 1 and 2, and it says the surrounding built environment. This is the last line in terms of design, appearance, height, scale, and massing. But there's not much detail in that, and I could narrate what my own thoughts are on that, Convener, but perhaps Mr. Harrison and Mr. Fogg could advise us if they would be content to take under delegation from us to, if you like, give a bit of more meat to these reasons for supporting a refusal. But that's my question to them.
If I might respond maybe first, then I have you noted in your comments expressing concern about I think you said the scale and basically not being in keeping with the immediate locality, and you felt it was, if I picked you up correctly, over prominent was I think a word you used, and doesn't respect the applicant's house either. And you made would that be basically the main point you wanted to see incorporated?
You're on mute, Councillor Wilson.
Something that many people desire, Convener, but we won't go there. I think in terms of the design, appearance, height, scale and massing, yes, these were the most prominent things. And I don't know if Convener would want to add in something about the amenity of the existing dwelling house, whether that would be a valid reason for refusal. It's not given by the planner, but it's one that I personally feel strongly about.
Yeah, yes, I feel I would agree with the councillor, but if it's possible to include something concerning the amenity of this house, although it is in the applicant's ownership and it could be considered his loss of amenity, I still think it's worth pointing out, because I think it's a very unfortunate access and very, very close to the house.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, in short, we can, I'm sure that some wording to that effect could be added to the reasoning.
Yes, Convener, I would agree with David Harrison on that respect.
Right, so I think then, Mr. Fogg, are you content? You have everything you require for this decision?
Yes, I am, Convener.
Right, so once again, I realise this will not necessarily be the decision the applicant required, but I think you can also agree we've given it a thorough examination today. So that's that one done, colleagues. So we now move on to the last application for today, which item 4.5, I beg your pardon, I'm losing track of my Roman numerals here. This is an application for alterations and extensions to dwelling house, Hillview Cottage, Taybridge Terrace, Aberfeldy. May I ask you, Mr. Harrison, to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application and it's for the alteration and extension at Hillview Cottage, Taybridge Terrace, Aberfeldy. The proposal is to extend a 3-bedroom house to provide a more generous kitchen and sanitary facilities at first floor level. The existing UPVC windows would be replaced with timber sash and case windows. The main extension would be clad in vertical painted timber boarding, roofed in slate to match the existing property, and with a zinc ridge flashing and cast iron rainwater goods. And I'll just take you through some photographs now, but you might like to have page 539 onwards, which provides you the location plan and site plan, and of course details of the proposed extensions. The general sequence of the photographs will be Hillview Cottage East and West, views of the application cottage, which is set to the rear, the cottage frontage, and then the context of the garden and adjoining properties, and then finally some other houses in the public street. So in this first photograph, I say we see Hillview Cottage East, which of course is within the applicant's ownership as identified in your plans. This is of course a semi-detached property. There, as you can see, there are 2 main doors there with a hedge in between. So the property, the actual building that fronts onto the public road, I say is a semi-detached property. So again, still on the public road on Taybridge Terrace, we swing slightly to the left of that photograph, and so we're looking down the gable of Hillview East. And as you'll see, there's a split in the application site here between the other land and the applicant's ownership and the application site itself. But I say to the rear of that gable, you can see the property that we'll see in much more detail in later photographs, and just showing you the general position of the principal extension that's envisaged on that eastern elevation. So from there in the public road we step into the application site, and here we have the cottage itself, which sits behind the main building to the front. And I've just given a sort of an outline in yellow to give you an indication of the proposed extension on that frontage in terms of as close as I can get to an appropriate scale of it. And as you can see, the ridge would exceed the ridge of the dormer, the wallhead dormers we've got there, and that would give you an indication of the porch at the ground floor level with of course the shower room above. So from there, if we move on in the next photograph, so we look directly opposite the section which is going to accommodate the extension on that eastern elevation. Just give you that in detail. And then from there, if we move slightly towards the left, we step into the garden ground associated with the property, and here you can see the existing kitchen extension, which of course would have an addition added to it, which you see in the papers. So that shows you the property, both the extension, the main property, and of course the rear roof sloping down of the cottage as it fronts onto Taybridge Terrace. From there, if we move slightly to the left, we're just catching the extension. That shows you the boundary of the application site on that side, looking in a northerly direction. And as you can see, there are a number of extensions on other properties, to the rear of other properties on Taybridge Terrace there as well. So again, swinging round to the left of that, we look up the remainder of the application site and to the other land beyond, and of course a garage building beyond as well, which is also part of the applicant's property. And so looking at that rear garden area, if we step up the access there, we have an opportunity to look back down to the cottage, which we're being extended and sort of broadly defined by the red line in terms of its application site. So this is now looking in a northeasterly direction, and we're just of course catching the garage in the applicant's ownership at the very back of his house plot. So from there we move back down, just to give you again, now you're orientated a bit, the outline of the extension, principal extension on that east elevation and its relationship with the other elements, both the kitchen extension as is, and of course the other property fronting onto Taybridge Terrace. So from there, if we swing slightly to the right, in the next photograph we see some of the other buildings, say looking in that southeasterly direction, other properties and other sort of lesser sort of supplementary buildings within the garden ground of the adjoining property there. And if we swing round to the right again, in the next photograph, you'll catch the main part of what's obviously a fairly substantial development on that side of the applicant's property. So from there, if we move on, we move out with the application site now back into the street. So this is us looking towards the adjoining property towards the south, which is called Strawberry Bank. And of course, we're getting the semi-detached cottages that we saw in the first photograph. So that's looking in that direction towards the centre of Aberfeldy, as it were, in that direction. And if we swing round in the next photograph and go in the opposite direction, we see the other semi-detached properties in the main fronting onto Taybridge Terrace. This is looking, say, to the northern side. So if I leave you with the last photograph, if you could maybe scroll back from there to one of the earlier photographs, and we'll just leave you with that photograph to give you a general context. Thank you. Turning now in summary to the applicant's case, the kitchen extension and timber sash encased windows are both accepted and supported by the officer. It is noted that that UPVC windows were installed prior to the designation of the conservation area. It is the design aspects of the two-storey extension that is viewed as unsympathetic by the planning officer. In response, these design criteria referred to in the reasons for refusal are assessed and responded to as follows. Firstly, regarding bulk, at 6.5 square metres, the footprint of the porch with the shower room above are considered to be very modest. The extension is slender rather than bulky. Regarding the question of scale, this concern seems to relate to the height of the extension. The Placemaking Guide of 2020 indicates a preference for new ridge lines to be set below original ridge levels. This is achieved by this extension. Regarding visual massing, there is a preference for extensions to be subservient to the main building in all respects. Again, it is considered that this has been secured. Regarding proportion, this would seem to concern the relationship between the width and height of the extension. At 2.4 metres, the width is not excessive, and the elongated form of the extension is seen as providing proportions that befit the host building. Regarding form, the extension follows the form and pitch of the existing dormers. It is appropriate that the ridge be higher than the dormers in the hierarchy of these elements, as this is a two-storey extension. Regarding composition, considering the whole building and its related parts in the context of the rule of thirds concept, the facade is seen as having the visual sense of rhythm, which is accentuated by the three gables and the extension also being higher. The extension is different, but the composition is seen as well balanced. Commenting on the officer's report, the proposed windows and timber cladding purposefully contrast with the existing cottage so that the history of the house is identifiable. The concerns expressed regarding the potential impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area seem to be contradicted by the recognition that the proposal would not have a negative impact due to its position behind the main building fronting onto the public road. The alternative suggested by removing the serviceable extension, that's the kitchen extension, is seen as unsustainable and would be at a prohibitive cost to the applicant. In conclusion, the proposal is seen as well designed and fulfills the needs of upgrading the facilities of the house. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. While the extension of the house is acceptable in principle, consideration has to be given to the details of the proposal and the need for it to contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding environment, in this case, the character and appearance of the Aberfeldy Conservation Area. The cottage is seen as having architectural quality, including traditional proportions, materials, fenestration, chimney stacks and stone detailing. The replacement of UPVC windows with timber sash and case windows preserves and enhances the character and appearance of the conservation area, even though the cottage is not readily visible from the public street. Similarly, enlarging the existing flat-roofed extension is acceptable in principle and also in terms of its design. However, the two-storey extension element of the proposal is not supported due to a combination of the following. Firstly, the projection of some 2.7 metres from the east elevation over a width of 2.5 metres. Secondly, the ridge and eaves levels are being higher than the adjoining wallhead dormers. Thirdly, the form and proportions do not match the corresponding aspects of the existing traditional property. And finally, the form and proportion of the windows do not respect the existing windows. It was suggested that consideration be given to an alternative scheme involving a small traditional porch and a two-storey extension in the position of the kitchen extension. This would require the reworking of the internal layout of the house. It is accepted that this would be more costly, but it is the planning authority's role to manage development in the long-term public interest. In this case, there have been no representations. However, there is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Can I ask colleagues, are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Illingworth?
I've no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, have you any questions for officers?
Just really one for Mr. Harrison. There was reference in the summary there from the planner's report about alternatives. And one, if I heard right and I read correctly, Mr. Harrison, is that the existing flat roofed, which isn't quite flat roofed, it's slated with a wee bit of flat on the top, but the existing kitchen extension to be basically taken down and replaced by a 2-storey extension, which would give upstairs accommodation as well as downstairs accommodation. Was that discussed by the planners with the applicant?
Yes, my understanding there was some discussion around that. Whether or not there was any correspondence, I don't know. But I think the officer was, shall we say, seeking to explore other options that might, shall we say, be a different solution to the desire to have improved accommodation, and obviously particularly the bathroom facilities or the shower room facilities at the first floor level. So I think there was a recognition by the officer that there could be an enlargement at the upper level, albeit in a different form, and from his point of view or her point of view, I'm not sure which, there seemed to be some thought given to possibly reworking the extension that's there at the moment, which, as you say, has a sort of a pitched but painted roof to it. That wasn't considered an option which was something that the applicant would be really in a position to carry out, I think principally due to the cost of having to do so much reworking of the interior of the house and its layout as part of any 2-storey extension, irrespective of any design it might have, by enlarging the building towards this, as we see in the photograph here, possibly replacing or building on top of the existing extension.
Mr. Harrison, thanks a lot. I'm sorry I forgot the term painted, but that's the right description for a roof like that. Yeah, thanks, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I have a couple of points of clarification, if I may, Mr. Harrison. A note on page 537 that shows the site plan. Is there any particular reason why, in effect, the bottom of the garden is shown in blue and separate from the red site, if it's all in the ownership of the applicant?
Is there any reason? I get the impression, and I stress the word impression, that it may be that the building, the cottage we're dealing with at the moment, may be let separately from the main house in some context. Right. It has one of these coded entry means of entry. You punch in a number of numbers in order to gain entry to the building, which, if it was the applicant's principal house, is something that probably wouldn't be there. But it seems to be used in an ancillary context.
Right, and then thank you. And then on page 539, just to maybe clarify the plans, a note that if you look straight at the house, the extension appears to be below the roof line, and yet when it shows you looking at from the gable end of the house, the extension seems to be above the roof line. Is that correct?
I think we're almost down to the thickness of a line here. I think if you actually take a ruler or something and run it across, I think that may be something that's a bit of an optical illusion, that it's hiding behind the chimney head. So I don't think there's any significant discrepancy there.
Right. OK, thank you very much for those points of clarification. If there are no further questions, colleagues, I think we can proceed to make a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah, I'm happy to proceed, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Me too.
Yes, as am I happy to proceed. So I think we will now assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Illingworth, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perthing and Ross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Yeah, I'd like to start by saying again, it's impossible not to have sympathy for the applicant. This was a house that was designed in the age of the chamber pot, and they're seeking to update it to the age of the ensuite. And no one can dispute that there is a need for that in this house. I think it's a subjective viewpoint on the extension on the front of the house, that there isn't an objective test that can say, well, this is a good thing or is it a bad thing. And on balance, I would just say that it's not to my taste, and I think it will detract from the appearance of a house in a conservation area. So unfortunately to the applicant, I think I would not be in favour of proceeding with this application.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edwards, for your view. Councillor Wilson, may we have your view?
Thanks, Convener. And on this occasion, I'm agreeing with Councillor Illingworth. I too understand why somebody would want to provide more modern facilities, but this design, not about the kitchen, but this design is not the right answer. I could never be described as subservient to the existing dwelling house. These are very attractive houses, many of these in Aberfeldy, and there have been what I call lumps and bumps added to one or two, but we're dealing with this one on its own merits, and I think the applicant said the footprint was small, but it's the scale and height of it that is huge. It's a small footprint, but it's an awful lot of building to achieve a lobby and a shower room, right? Huge amount of building, and I think whilst I support the small kitchen, and it's to make a dining kitchen, perhaps this is holiday accommodation. I simply don't know. But if there's a key entry system, it's either an elderly person, in which case the house is difficult for them getting up and down these stairs, or it could be a holiday accommodation. It matters not. We're here not about the functionality of the house, but about the appearance of what it is in planning terms. And I also think that the applicants need to have a real look. I can understand that looking at the layout plans for the actual for the first floor, that's on page 539, Convener, why it would be difficult to use the planner's suggestion of using an upstairs bit of the back extension to provide a shower room, because you'd simply need to go through the big bedroom for that. But it would be feasible to put an ensuite in there. At least it would service one room upstairs, and the bathrooms downstairs. So they would provide ample shower and loo facilities. I think and that's internal, and it would be done at an awful lot less cost than what would be a big extension at the front. But I support the ethos of what they're trying to do, to improve their property, but in no way can I agree with the design of the front elevation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. I think I'm certainly of the view, and I would agree with you both, that this house would benefit from some improvement. It's a fairly antiquated design internally. It's unfortunate that the idea of the kitchen extension and the replacement of the windows and so on are all very good and laudable, but there is no doubt that this extension is quite simply too large, and I think unnecessarily large to improve the property. And on this occasion, I think we all three are in agreement that we would uphold the planning officer's view about this. And uphold the reasons for refusal. So I think we're quite clear on this occasion, Mr. Fogg, that our decision is unanimous, that we uphold the reasons for refusal. I don't know, Councillor Illingworth, if you had anything you would want to add to the reasons to refusal, or are you happy with them as they stand?
I'm happy with them as they stand.
Thank you. So, Mr. Fogg, are you content? You have everything you require for this?
Yes, Convener, I just wonder, I'm conscious of the hour and don't want to detain you, but having listened to your comments this morning on it and your general contentment with the the kitchen proposals. I wonder if you want to give a little bit more specification into the reason for refusal, where it refers to the proposals, and it doesn't differentiate between the kitchen extension and the front elevation. And I wonder if to do that would better reflect your position this morning.
Well, I think Councillor Illingworth, I think what do you feel about that?
I'm comfortable with the wording used by the officers.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable with the wording, but open to suggestions by Councillor Wilson or Councillor Simpson.
Well, I think I feel, thanks, Councillor Wilson. I mean, I think I feel that there is going to be. I mean, it's not the duty of this review body, thank goodness, to offer people planning advice, but it would seem to me that there is going to have to be a major rethink as regards to this. So I think perhaps to give permission for one bit and not the other bit would not necessarily be helpful. So I think I agree with Councillor Illingworth. I think on this occasion, although our comments regarding the other things are valid, I think from the point of view of refusal, I think I'm happy to keep with the wording that the officers have used.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so I think we have that decision. So I'm afraid once again this will not be the decision the applicant was wanting, but we certainly given it a good and thorough examination. So I would like to thank you all for your attendance today, particularly the two volunteer councillors who got their time to assist with the review body today. And thank you for your attendance, and we'll see some of you next time. Thank you.